So in this chapter, remember that we have been taking a look at different ways to display information. We've looked at circle graphs, we've looked at mean, median, mode, we've looked at stem and leaf plots, we've looked at different measures of variation, kind of the range, and dividing information into different quartiles. What we're going to spend the next couple days taking a look at is other types of graphs and how information can be displayed. This is the last new type of graph that you probably haven't seen yet. The ones you see tomorrow, you'll have seen most of those tomorrow. So this is kind of the last new graph that you haven't seen before. And it's called a histogram. And you might have recognized this, and as you're copying this vocab word into your notes, don't worry about making the table and the graph at all, because you're going to be putting some of your own into your notes today. So don't worry about those two. But a histogram, it's basically a bar graph, but the bar graph is a little bit different than the bar graphs that you guys typically create for other classes. They organize the information into intervals. So you'll notice over on the side here for the table that basically what we did is we took information of all of these ages and we tallied them. So like I surveyed a bunch of people and asked them what their age was, and I created all of these little tallies here. And then I just figured out the frequency of how many people in that age group came to this store is what we're trying to find, okay? So there's pros and cons to it. It's nice because it gives us a general idea of how the information is spread throughout these intervals. But the con is that I don't know, let's say in this age group of 1 to 10, I don't know of those 5 people what their exact ages were. So that can be a downfall. So we can never find mean, median, or mode using a histogram at all because of the fact that we don't have exact numbers. We can have a good idea on the range, but again, we won't have an exact number on the range, okay? Some things that I want to point out with the histogram, you'll notice with the intervals, they're always listed down here along the x-axis. And notice that each interval is the same size, 1 to 10, 11 to 12, 21 to 30. They all have the same spacing in between them. On the y-axis, then, we have something called the frequency. And again, that's how often that interval occurred. And you can choose to count by 1s, by 2s, by 5s, whatever you need to, okay? Doesn't matter. And then again, all of our graphs will always have a title. So when you guys are doing your homework again, I'm going to be looking for those titles. There's some special things about how you make a histogram. Typically when you guys make a bar graph, you make the bars and they don't touch at all. They're just bars. Nothing really unique about them. With a histogram, there's something very, very particular about them versus a bar graph. One of the things you'll notice that all of the bars touch the one that came before it and the one that's after that. There's no space between the bars that we build right off of one to the next one. And then you'll also notice that these bars are about the same width, okay? If you were to use technology, they would make them be the same width. When you guys are making yours, I'm not going to be expecting you to get a ruler out, but I'm going to be expecting them to be close. I'll give you an example of one that I would take points off for them not being the same width, okay? So that kind of just talks about what a histogram is. We are going to practice making them, and then we're going to practice answering questions from a histogram is what our goal is for today. So to start with, let's talk about how we make a histogram. First thing, you're going to draw and label a horizontal and vertical axes, so kind of making that L, that first quadrant. Remember along the x-axis of the horizontal one, that's always going to be our our intervals, and the vertical, the y-axis, is going to be our frequency. And again, a big one that some of you guys are missing as you're doing some of your homework assignments, especially one of them that you got back today with your stem and leaf plots, is remembering to title, that all of our graphs need to have a title. And then you're going to make bars that are the same width, making sure that they touch each other, that represent the frequency of each interval. You guys will never have to, for my class at all, make the frequency table. as you move through your next couple math classes, you may need to be making a frequency table. So right now we're just focusing on making the histogram part of it. But at some point you'll have to make that table that we were talking about. So again, steps are pretty simple. Draw and label your axes, making sure that you're titling, and then making bars that they are the same width and they touch each other to represent the frequency. Now real quick, I want to show you guys an example of bars that are not the same width that I would take points off. So let's say you were making your histogram and your first, and I'm not going to put numbers, I'm just going to draw a sketch. Let's say you make your first bar like this. Let's say you make your next bar like this. We can all tell those two are not the same width. This is one that if you were to do something like this on a homework assignment or a quiz or test coming up later this week, I would take points off for this. These are clearly not the same width. Now, if you were to do something like this, I would be okay with this. I can tell that they're pretty darn close to each other. They're not exact, but you're close, okay? So I'm, again, not expecting you to get a ruler out or anything, so they should be close. This one, I would take points off for it. Definitely not the same width. This one is okay. All right, now what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have the sub pass out your graphs and tables like we've been doing for the last couple days. If you guys can glue that half sheet of paper into your notes, and when you're done, just hang on to your glue sticks for right now, and at the end of the lesson, you can put your glue sticks back at that point. But go ahead and glue in those graphs and tables for me, and once everyone's ready, then go ahead and press play, and we'll move on to actually making some histograms and answering some questions with them. All right, so hopefully everyone has their tables and their graphs all glued into their notes. What we're going to do first is we're going to make a histogram, taking a look at this table. This table shows the cost of various water parks. So our first step is to make our title, label our X and Y axes. So the title of this one is written in this top sentence here, for example, A. The table shows the cost of various water parks. So we're going to write that in at the top here. And you can kind of shorten it if you don't want to say various and just say cost of water parks. That's fine. And then for yours, you'll need to make your X and Y axes. So go ahead and do that. All right, and now let's go ahead and label those axes. Again, the X axis is going to be your intervals. So my intervals are going to be over here. It's going to be the first thing in your table, and that's our cost. So I'm going to put cost. I'm going to put it down just a little bit so that way I have some space to write in my intervals. And I'm going to put a dollar sign just so we know we're not talking about euros or pesos or, you know, something else, some other kind of currency. Then what I do is I see that there are 5 different intervals. So I'm going to make little hashes here and space them out pretty close to the same width. So 1, 2, 3. And that's going to help me as I'm drawing my bars. Then I'm going to write each of these intervals in the spaces here, not on the lines, in the actual interval. And I usually write it sideways because it kind of fits a little bit better. So I usually write it this way. So I'm going to write in each of those. And that's 47 at the end. It's a little smush there. There. A little bit better, but that's okay. Once you have that done, then again your y-axis is always your frequency. So again, we're going to label that. And again, I usually write frequency so it goes sideways. If you were to write it the correct way in how we write, that's fine. And then we see that my frequency goes up to 7. So I just need to count so I get up to 7. You can count by 1s, you can count by 2s, by 4s. Most people don't count by 4s, but you could. And then count by 5s or 10s. This one here, because we're only going till 7, I would count by 1s. So I'm going to start with my hashes, and then I'm going to put in my numbers. And again, those should be spaced the same distance apart. Because you guys are using lined paper or graph paper, it should be pretty easy then to make these be the same distance apart. So you can maybe make each line worth 1. If you're using graph paper, that'll make this part really easy, making sure they're the same width as well. And don't just put the hash marks, make sure you actually put the numbers, so that way the reader of your graph knows that each hash is worth 1. So all of that is step 1, just getting the graph ready to go. And now we're actually going to put our bars in our graph. Remember that our bars have to touch and they have to be the same width. So my first bar for 8 to 15 has a frequency of 5. So here's what I do. I just start at 5 and I go across until I get to my hash mark and I go down. You don't need to worry about shading it in. You can choose to, but most people just leave their bars open. Now to do my next frequency, I need to go up to 7. So I'm just going to start here for my last bar, go up to 7, over, and then down. Again, you can see in mine, they're not the exact same width, they're darn close though. Then we'll do the same thing for 4. This one I'm just going to go to where 4 is off of my last bar and make it so they touch. Now, something interesting happens between 32 and 39. It's a 0. So for that one, you can just put a line at the very bottom here, or you can leave that blank. There's nothing that we need to put there for a bar because there weren't any numbers in that interval at all. So for our last one, then we just have to make both sides of the bar going up to 2 and down. So this would be an example of making a histogram. If you guys have questions about this, see if you guys can help each other out. Otherwise, when you guys are ready, go ahead and take a look at the next graph, next histogram I should say, and I want you guys to start making that one. So you should be making a histogram based on the number of people who entered this store using this frequency table. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and try this one. When most people are done, I'm going to have you guys pause the video, and when most people are done, go ahead and press play and see if your histogram looks kind of similar to mine. I will give you one hint with your frequency. I would either count by 2s or by 5s is what I would do, okay? But go ahead and try to make yours. All right, when you're all done, your histogram should look something like this. I chose on mine for my frequency on this one to count by 5s. So it just meant when I was doing some of my bars that I had to estimate about where they were, and that's perfectly fine. But notice that my bars are all about the same width. Towards the end, they got a little bit fatter, but it's okay. I would count something like this. And again, notice that my bars are touching. And notice again, I have a title. I labeled my X and Y axes. All of those are things that need to be included. If you have any questions about this, help each other out. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move on and let's actually take a look at some histograms and answer some questions from them. All right, moving on to these next ones. So now I'm giving you a histogram and we're going to answer some questions. But before we ever start answering questions from a graph, we should always figure out what the histogram is talking about. So this histogram is talking something about test scores. So how many points students earned on their test. And it looks like they put them in intervals from 60 to 69, 70 to 79, 80, 89, 99, 90 to 99, and 100 to 109. And then they have the frequency of how many students scored in that interval. Okay, perfect. Now, let's answer some questions. So the first question, how many people scored at least 90 points on the test? So again, if you don't want to write it all, I'll kind of underline the important things that you should put in your notes. So maybe put at least 90 points is what we're going to do for this first question. So if we want to know how many people scored at least 90, we're going to include any bars from 90 on up. So if I take a look, I'm going to include this bar, and I'm going to include this one. So I'm going to have to estimate on this first bar. From 90 to 99, 9 people scored in that frequency, or that interval I should say, and 2 people scored in this one. So 11 students scored at least 90 points on their test. Now let's take a look in the other direction. This one says what percent of the students scored 79 points or lower. So what percent? 79 points or lower. So for this one, I first need to know how many people scored 79 points or lower. So that means I'm going to look at this bar and this bar, because both of these groups scored less than 79 points on their test. So let's see how many kiddos that was. So 4 in this interval and 7 in this interval. So there were 11 kiddos on this one as well that scored less than 79. But remember, for a percent, I have to have the part over the whole. So I'm going to divide by the total number of kids who took this test. So to figure that out, I have to think about how many total took it. So I'm missing one bar. There were 14 in this bar. So let's think about how many total kids. So we're going to add up all of those numbers. So when you add up 4 plus 7 plus 14 plus 9 plus 2, because now we're looking at all of the bars, you end up with 36 kiddos who took that test. But remember, from chapter 7, to turn a fraction into a percent, you're going to divide and times by 100 and rounding to the nearest tenth place. If I remember correctly, this one was 30.5, and I think it repeated. So rounding to the tenth place, 30.6%. So 30.6% of the kiddos scored 79 points or lower on this test. Questions on that one? So help each other out. Otherwise, let's take a look at the next question. So this question says, is it possible to tell the highest score on the test? So think about this when we talked about when I was first introducing a histogram. One of the great things is you can see how often numbers happen or how often things happen in each interval. But the downside is we never know the exact values. So while I know there were 2 kiddos that scored between 100 and 109 points, I unfortunately don't know their exact score. So it's not possible for us to know the highest score. So we're going to put here no, and you don't need to explain if this question came up on the homework, but I want you to explain on here so you understand why we can't tell the highest score. And our reason would be we don't know their exact scores. The only thing that we know is they scored between 100 and 109. Maybe their score was 100. Maybe their score was 104. We don't know. All we know is that these 2 kids fell in this interval. So there's no possible way for us to know what the absolute highest score is. So that's kind of the downfall of a histogram. But what a histogram is used for is this last question. It says, in what range is a student most likely to score? So we're just going to look to see what interval would most students score on this test. So for that one, you're going to be looking for the biggest bar, and that will indicate what frequency or which interval most kiddos are to score on this. So if I were to look at this, I would say most of the kids would score somewhere between 80 and 89 points. We're looking for the one that has the highest frequency. Questions on that one? If not, or if you do, help each other out. If not, let's take a look at the next one. And then for this one, I want you guys to try answering these questions on your own. They're very, very similar to questions that we just did, just a different graph. Let's just talk through the graph real quick first. But this one, it talks about the highest elevations in the United States. Elevation meaning like how far above sea level the state, the city is located, kind of thing. So on the side here, we have their elevation in meters. This side, the number of states. So see if you guys can go ahead and answer these 4 questions when you're ready, when most people are done. And I see that my graph is kind of cut off here a little bit. One quick thing, I'll help you guys out with this one. What percent of states, I don't know what I have actually as a word there, but what percent of states' elevations are above 250 meters? So you can still read what you need to. I don't know what word I actually have hidden there. That's okay. But see if you can answer these 4 questions. Press pause, and then press play once most people are done, and we'll see if we come up with the same thing. All right, so to begin with, I'm just going to talk through how I estimated numbers on this graph. Your numbers may not be exact. They might be off by 1 or 2. So that will change basically only number this second question here, okay? But I estimated them to be about 24, 14, 3, 11, and 2, okay? Again, might be just off just a little bit, especially on these first 2. If you had 23 and 13, I would be okay with that, okay? All right, first question. How many states' highest elevations are at least 3751? So for this one, we're looking at these last 2 bars here, because at least this height or higher, we want to start at 3751 and include everything above it. So there are about 13 states that are above that height. Looking at the next question. Careful on this one. Make sure, especially on your homework, you're looking whether it's asking for just how many states or what percent, like this one does. So for the percent, you want to find out how many meet that. So this one above 2,500. So some of you guys may have thought of, well, shouldn't I include something from here? Because it says above 2,500, you're to include all the bars above that number. So we're going to start here with the 3, 11, and 2. So I said that there were 16 of those. Divided by the total number. Again, I'm going to use the number. I know you guys are probably saying, Mrs. Haugen, there's only 50 states in the United States. I know that. But based on how I estimated these bars to be, I came up with 54. Okay. It's okay. Our numbers are going to be pretty close. Because you always want to use how you estimate the height of these bars. So for mine, I had 29.6%. Again, as long as you're really close to this, if you would have estimated some of these bars a little bit different, your percent might be just off a little bit. But if you gave me 45%, that's wrong. Should be right around that 29% mark. Is it possible to tell the highest elevation? Hopefully you all are like, nope, can't do that because we don't know the exact height. We know 2 states fall in this height here, but again, have no idea what their exact heights are. And last but not least, what range do most states have for their highest elevation? Again, looking for the bar that has the highest, that's the highest, and it falls in this range here. So you're listing this interval of 0 to 1250. If you have questions, help each other out. Otherwise, I can answer questions tomorrow on this too. All right, the last thing that we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at if I gave you 2 histograms, we also want to use them to be able to compare information. It's great just to look at one, but realistically, when you're looking at information, you're probably comparing it to another set of data or another histogram or something, okay? So on this one here, it asks the question, which city has a greater number of buildings at least 60 feet or taller? So I would say you probably have to write most of this into your notes for your example. So which city has a greater number of buildings at least 60 feet tall? So we want to take a look at kind of getting the numbers for each of them and figure out which bars we need to use. So if we're looking at Atlanta, Georgia, we're going to be looking at all of these bars here. For Charlotte, we're going to be looking at these. Now, you could actually figure out the exact numbers for each city, but my guess is you guys are going to be able to tell from this graph which city has more tall buildings that fall in this range here. And hopefully you can see that Atlanta has a lot more bars in general, and they're taller than what Charlotte does. If you were to actually look at the numbers, I found that Atlanta had 10 tall buildings that fell in there, and Charlotte only had 2. So you could look at the numbers as well, but I think you guys are all pretty smart kids, and you can look at the graphs and look at the bars and be able to compare them. So for this one, it's Atlanta. All right. Now it asks the question, how many tall buildings are in both cities? So now we have to take a look at adding up all the bars in both of them. So let's take a look at how many Atlanta has. So 14 in this one, 2, 5, 2, 2, 2. So let's go ahead and add up how many Atlanta has. And if you guys add that up, I'm hoping that you came up with 26. Let's see how many Charlotte has. Charlotte has, this is halfway, so it's 5, 2, 1, 1. No, Charlotte only has 9 according to this. So how many tall buildings in both cities? We are looking at 35. And last but not least, we just want to compare the heights of tall buildings. This was something that I noticed you guys kind of struggled with comparing or getting information from graphs. So when you compare these, there's several answers you could have for this. That would be perfectly fine. My hope that you are recognizing when you look at this one that overall, just Atlanta has more tall buildings than Charlotte. That is perfectly fine. You could also say that Charlotte, you could say that Atlanta has the tallest building between the two because this one has one in that 1,000 feet height range and Charlotte does not. So you could say something like that. But my guess is most of you guys will say that Atlanta has more tall buildings than Charlotte. But something that is different about those two. Again, lots of things you could do on this one. That's my guess on what most of you guys would write for that. All right, that takes us through everything. So you guys are going to have the rest of the time to work on this homework assignment. Remember that your Chapter 13 test is on Thursday, And Friday is going to be the Chapter 12 end date. So make sure you guys have everything taken care of for Chapter 12 by that date. If you have any questions, let me know, and I can help you guys with them tomorrow. There'll be quite a bit of work time tomorrow on some things. But make sure you guys have this homework assignment ready for tomorrow.